Good evening. Can everybody hear? Great. So the origin of this evening was one of the fantastic evenings that some of you will have had at the River Cafe. Product placement. Because if Richard and Renzo are famous, so is Ruth, and so is the River Cafe. And I was lucky enough to be there a few months ago with these two old friends, and they were discussing life and architecture and Italy and food. And I thought, what a privilege to eavesdrop on this conversation. I said, we really ought to do this in public. And so here we are. Those are all the things that we're going to talk about tonight. They were both reflecting on the fact that when they first worked together, they were bad boys, Renzo's phrase, and here they are now, a peer of the realm and a senator in the Italian parliament, though Renzo insists he's still a bad boy at heart. They obviously both worked together on the Pompidou Centre, and we might begin by talking about that. And they're both intensely interested in public life, public space, in the importance of good design, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to talk to them for a while, or rather question them for a while. They're going to talk to me. I asked some questions of Twitter earlier, and there's some quite good questions from Twitter. So we'll have some Twitter questions, and then we'll throw open the panel. So please think of the questions that you want to know too. So I'd like to sort of begin before the Pompidou and try and understand this meeting, how this meeting took place, and what kind of architects you were before you met, because you were both quite inexperienced at the time that you met. You weren't the obvious choice for this commission. Richard, you were born in Italy, you'd worked in England, you'd been educated in England, you had been starstruck by going to America. I'm condensing your life into virtually tweet-like paragraphs. Renzo, you had obviously also Italian, had come from a family of builders, were fascinated by materials. Perhaps you could, rather than talk about yourselves, perhaps you could describe each other. What did you know of Richard's work before you met him and worked with him?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I didn't know very little. We were not very well known. Actually, we are completely unemployed and completely unknown. Correct? More or less.
Yes.
And well, it was a kind of love at first sight. You know, I came to London because that was the way I found the best way to save myself from Italian academy. I love my country. I love the country. But academy is a terrible experience, you know. And London for me was at that time the symbol of freedom. Freedom. I mean,
artistic freedom? Or?
Also rebellion to the academy, you know, rebellion to this, the idea that architecture was the art of making a better world. It was a completely utopian, but that was, so for me it was a mix of making construction and saving the world, you know. And I guess Richard was in the same tune. And also on top of that, Richard talked in Italian. I didn't talk English. So that was a good way to, and it took probably about 10, 15 minutes.
You met him and you liked him, but what kind of work was he doing at that time?
What you were doing? What I was doing myself, I was playing.
No, I'm not interested. I'll ask him about you. You tell me what struck you about his work.
No, I have to talk about my
work. Yeah, you have to talk about his work
I
first.
prefer to talk about his work.
I'll get you to talk about your work in a minute. But.
Okay. No, I was just playing with like a little boy on the beach, playing with sand. I was not really doing architecture. I was making construction. I'm a son of a builder, and for me, becoming architect was just making good construction. Basic shelter for human being. So I didn't think about architecture too much. I mainly thought it was about doing experiments.
Okay, so I'm now going to get you to talk about him. What did you know anything about him when this unknown Italian turned up in London?
I knew something about him. I knew something about his structures. But the simple reason that we got together is because we thought two unemployed people were better than one, I think. There's more to talk about. And as Renzo says, in a sense, just walking through the streets and so on, we were soon talking about urban planning spaces and what architecture could be. I knew certainly about the structures, the experimental structures that he'd done. And he sort of linked in, I think, with what we were doing. We have some disagreement about. Renzo says that he met it when we have a common doctor and I had measles. I can't remember. And the doctor said, "Do you want to see a person with measles?" That was me. And that's how we met. He came to see me.
Okay, so you came together through measles.
Through measles, exactly.
So the story will be familiar to some in the audience. It's familiar to you, but to others it'll still seem extraordinary that this extraordinary major project in Paris, and you've described yourselves like a couple of deadbeats, unemployed, in love with each other, bonded by measles. But how on earth did you get this extraordinary commission in Paris? How did it happen?
Well, it was a competition. We made a competition because Richard made a good memo saying that we should not make a competition. And our friendship is based on one saying the opposite of the other one. So he said we should not do the competition. So I said we should do the competition. And then finally we made the competition. But I'm joking, but we made a competition because we got to do something. We are not really very much busy in doing many things. So we are teaching, you remember? We are teaching at the architecture school, architecture association school. Teaching was a big word because teaching, it was really helping students to find themselves. But we are also helping ourselves to find ourselves. So it was a kind of funny. And we made a competition, and we won because we never thought we can win such kind of competition. We are absolutely clear. The reason why Richard said we should not do the competition was absolutely correct, because it was monumental, it was, I would say, well, it was heavy, and it was, even the brief was too heavy. You remember? We actually didn't look at the brief. We only read the first page. We read the first page, and then because we didn't understand too much, we gave up. So anyway, we will never win. So the reason why we won is probably because we are totally free, and we actually dream. And we were bad boys. I said before. So because we were bad boys, we thought we have to liberate, we have to free up culture building from this kind of intimidation. We have to open this. We have to make something different, completely different.
So you're quite arrogant boys as well as being bad boys.
We were naive boys, I think. That may be the same thing. In other words, we dared to think that we could fly, even though we've never tried flying in a way. And I think that's important. Maybe if I may go back half a step, I think it would be wrong to say that our architecture, which we had done, and he had done some amazing laboratories and a beautiful office, very small buildings, but they were immensely poetic. And I had learnt from a rather painful experience with one house, which was successful in terms that it was well accepted. It took 6 architects 6 years when we were trying to build 300,000 houses a year. We felt we weren't doing very well. So we were looking for paths. And in a sense, we started to, sorry, are you all right? What? Oh, I can't see that. Oh, yes, I can see that. Yes, that was the first take. That was the first house. So we were reacting in some ways to that house. He'd had a certain direction. I had started on a prefabricated housing of systems, zip up. It was called my parents' house and so on. So there was the beginning of a series of things which did overlap. And then we met about a year before we did, the Pompidou came along. The Pompidou came along because Arabs came to us and said, do you want to look at this competition? And when I read it, I said no, and I wrote a brief saying why we shouldn't do it, and as Renzo said, he won. And we did do it with great pain at that time. And then when we won it, I remember Renzo phoned up, and this Vecchio, which he always calls me, the old man. I'm 3 years older than he is. And he said, sit down, we won. I said, stop pulling my leg.
You said under your breath, as Renzo was talking, you said the word political. He said it was monumental, and you said it was political.
Yes, it was political. My opinion.
It was a pretentious idea. I mean, this idea looked pretentious, unless you do exactly what we did. That was blowing up everything. But you know what, Alan? They never understood what we were doing. Frankly, we made it because nobody really understood.
When they saw it.
No, of course. Nobody really understood what we were doing. And that's why we are lower. Still now, every time I go there, I live not far away from the Centre Pompidou. Every time I go there, I'm not surprised that the building's there. I'm surprised we were allowed to do it.
Yes.
It's absolutely mad. Yes. Nobody, we only made because we went on for 5 or 6 years saying, je ne comprends pas.
It's a useful tip. Some people say it's aesthetically more a Rogers building than a piano building. Is that fair?
Who?
Yeah.
But there wasn't a piano or a Rogers building before. Hardly, certainly. I mean, there were bits that were there. I mean, you know, I was certainly very interested and used the word political, social, public. And we were both interested, I suppose, in more democratic forms of structure and all those pieces that came together. I don't know what you can say now. You know, I wouldn't say much. You say this much.
Well, I think it was a mix of many people ask us who did what. You know? Yeah. And you know, the truth is that because architecture is a job where you mix, I mean, at 10 o'clock in the morning you are a poet, at 11 o'clock you become a builder, at 12 you are a militant, you know, you keep changing, keep shifting. So, you know, what happened is that with Richard, I don't remember one moment I've been the poet, he was the builder. Or another moment, he was the builder, I was the poet. You know, it's kind of thing like that. So it's hard to say who did what, and hard to say if that was a Roger Piano Roger building, because it was our way to learn about life. I mean, basically at the beginning, I was more the bricoleur. I was more the one making bits and pieces. But it's not true to say that it was the philosophy made by somebody and the building made by the other one, because it's also the other way around. So we've been really mixing and experience all time. And this is because the real nature of architecture is this, is to shift around, I mean, to break frontier. And you move from society, community, you move to history, you move to technology, you move to poetry, you move to all those things. And you mix.
The facade tells you a lot, sorry, as it happens to be the facade of the competition, in a way.
Just talk about the facade?
Interrupting you. Well, in the sense that it really is the form of information about and the political stance. Idea of a great piazza, and then the piazza, the public domain, would move up the facade in what was then streets in the air and lifts. And that the facade was very much, though it was vertical, it was actually used as a horizontal thing. And then the images on it, which we, both Renzo and I, said actually the use of the facade would be to connect up with MoMA, New York, or British Museum, and so on. But of course, if you look at the images, you'll see it's Vietnam. So there's a second layer of it that is a political statement as well, and as a sort of In other words, it was very much, I mean, we have to remember that France, Europe, the Western world had nearly collapsed 2 years before,
Now,
with
you know what,
1968.
Richard, we're just watching that drawing that I don't watch all day. I mean, it looked like temporary building. And
Yes.
you know why? Because at that time, we only made temporary building ourselves. Maybe the building with the longest life I made was 6 months. You know, and when we met Monsieur Pompidou, you remember, Richard,
Yeah.
he watched us, he said, you understand, sir, that this building will have a 6th century life. And we watched each other. We were not building anything living more than 6 months. and this looked like a building that can live 6 months or 12 months. And the guy said us 5 siècles. Watching each other saying, my God, what is that? But it was that kind of atmosphere.
I'd love to hear one of you, I don't know which one to turn to, just talk about the role of engineers in this project.
Yes.
Richard, go ahead.
I mean, obviously, I'll say something about teamwork. I was going to say it when we were talking. You know, again, it's a mistake to think that this comes out of as not only between Renzo and my mind, but we had tremendous engineers. We had tremendous when we got together, because the building was morally different. The spirit didn't change, but the building was different by the time it was completed, because we had to face realities like sort of fire escapes, fire heights, costs, and so on. So it changed, but the spirit was not changed. And certainly, during the development of Peter Rice, who was a brilliant engineer, probably certainly the most brilliant engineer I've ever met, and it questions what is an engineer and what is an architect, because Peter crossed both sides. And certainly Renzo does in many ways.
I think it's really a job that started with Arab, the engineers, because without them, we are not even making the building. You may have forgot that they also offered £5,000 to do the job. You remember?
Yeah.
And they offered not to pay us, but to pay for the grant. At that time was something interesting.
I think it was £800.
And you know, from that moment, then we started to build up with, of course, Ted Apple, with Tom Bach, you remember, and of course,
Yes.
Peter Rice. Peter Rice became a friend of life. But it was so difficult to say, this is the architecture, this is the building, this is construction, this is structure. And this is exactly what our profession should do, because the art of making building, the art of making shelter, basic shelter for human being and human community, and to be able to do that, you needed to mix those functions. Creativity is without frontier. You cannot say, that's architecture, that's engineering, that's construction. They all come together.
They all come together. I'm sure there will be members of the audience who want to talk more about the Pompidou Centre, but let's. I've just got one obvious final question about this, which is, it was such a great partnership. You are lifelong friends, but you never worked together on a building. Why is that?
It's complicated. I got to go back to Geneva. And Richard came back to London, and I wanted to come back to London, but I didn't. So it was, first to start, it was a kind of personal situation, a bit complicated, about geography, I think. I don't really quite remember exactly what happened, but anyway, you know, the other thing to say is that we never lost ourselves. I mean, we are like a brother in the sense that when I have a problem, I call him, and he gives me suggestion that I never consider really, but I do the opposite. we talk constantly. So it's a kind of funny thing. We didn't work because then when teamwork start to go, you know, to organize in different way, it become less easy. But we have been probably interfering with ourselves, creatively speaking, constantly from
And
then
there's
to
no
now.
hope of a Beatles-style reunion.
No,
that could
we
come
are.
together.
We are. Here we are.
Yeah.
I think, by the way, again, we come back to where we started. We had no work again. At the end of the Pompidou, we couldn't find anybody else who wanted to build a Pompidou Centre, and everybody thought we only built Pompidou Centres in a sense. So there wasn't much of a market there.
Okay,
So
well, let's move on to, because again, I want you to talk about each other. Renzo, I want to hear you just talk about Richard as an architect. So in the 40 years since the Pompidou Centre, Richard's gone on to build wonderful buildings all over the world, the Lloyd Centre, Channel 4, airports, the Millennium Dome, and too many to mention. But watching Richard develop as an architect and becoming one of the world's great architects, just talk about that a bit. He's your friend.
Watching Richard.
Yeah, I mean, just talk about how what's interested you about how he's developed as an architect.
I guess the first thing I can suggest is to go to see the exhibition. I went there this morning. I will go back again tomorrow morning. That exhibition, the Royal Academy, it's fantastic. It's a great exhibition. It's an exhibition where you feel, you feel the depth. I mean, it's like like an iceberg. In the iceberg, you only see a little piece. But that exhibition makes the invisible visible. It actually say why you need 90% of mass under the water invisible to make that little piece visible. That sort of thing. So from that exhibition, you understand that the visible part of the work Richard done, I have done, but we have done together, even at distance. By the way, we have the quite good habit to see each other and to talk about the scheme we are doing. So, and Richard never said that's horrible, but he just watch me, and he understand.
What are your three favorite Richard buildings?
Which one?
Yeah, the three favorites.
Oh, can I have 10 minutes to think about it? Can I think about it? I have to answer immediately? Many.
Pass or fail?
Many.
Okay, well, you think about that because now I want Richard.
Many, but I'm confused because this morning, by looking through the exhibition, you realize that it's a kind of integrity. There's a quality that I think belongs not just to a piece of art or a book or to architecture. It belongs to people and the oeuvre, what is called the oeuvre. And when you go through that exhibition, you realize that integrity is probably the most important thing. That makes it more difficult to say that's good, that good, that good, that bad. The entire thing comes together. And you understand why architecture is so complex. Why is it so complicated art and complex art? It's an art where everything meets, everything comes, it's about changing the world. It's about social life, it's about community, it's about justice, about all those things coming together. But at the same time, it's about nuts and bolts. It's about, you have to be extremely pragmatic. So in that exhibition, you feel that. And that's why it became a bit difficult. If I take you through the exhibition, I will tell you that the 10 best thing I love, or the 3, are this, and this, because, everything comes together. Integrity and coherence, not style. Style is bad. Style is a kind of trap. But integrity, coherence is very important. And this is, I think, what is making me particularly in love with that exhibition.
Now I want you to talk about Renzo in the last 40 years. So he's, again, built too many buildings to reel off now. In London, in the last 3 years alone, we've got the Shard and Central St. Giles. What's interested you about the way that Renzo has developed into this great architect?
I suppose having worked so closely together for, in fact, the best part of a decade, clearly we're pretty close, and there we have our buildings are easily. You can look at it and you can more or less say that's one else. The thinking about it, which is what Renzo was saying, is very much, when I came to the exhibition, and I think, I can't say who thinks about things in a way, but I decided to call it Inside Out, which was really about the concept of turning up constraints upside down, which I remember you often used the word, you get a constraint, and you turn it upside down, which is sort of inside down. In other words, it's not what you see or what you think, it's what the challenges are and all the immersive extension. And it was also called, and it is also called ethos, which is a much more philosophical. It's about fairness and about society and so on. So, I think in that sense we've gone on much together. From my point of view, the critical part has been to see the democratizing of buildings. So that's, for me, perhaps the most important part of architecture, democratizing of cities, the humanizing of cities. And we come back to sort of the fairness. I would say it's very much the same, except maybe that Renzo has because of his greater ability, certainly structurally, and in construction and so on, he probably concentrates maybe a little bit more on poetry and poetic elements with it, and I perhaps be a bit more on the social aspects, but they are very much the same thing.
And your 3 favorite Renzo Piano buildings?
It's like choosing your 3 favorite children. I don't know. I wouldn't dare.
Is this a common thing with architects, that they dodge the question about these kind of things?
Yes, we're good at it.
All right, okay. All right. Well, somebody can try again from the audience later. Can I talk about ancient and modern? You both come from ancient cultures, and you're both modernists. And you're sometimes criticized for being insensitive to the past. I think when you were studying, you were actually criticized by one of your tutors for being too interested in the past and too inspired by historical cities. Just talk a bit, I don't know, one or the other about this relationship between the old and the new, and how you have sympathy.
It's a very old story. I'm Italian. Richard is more Italian than you believe, by the way.
I think you're more English. You're even
and
lovely tweed jacket.
I will tell you about that. Anyway, of course, I have fantastic gratitude. I'm sure you have the same. We have gratitude for the past. We have a fantastic gratitude. But there's a moment when
a series of random pictures are coming up. There's family holiday snaps now. Is that the 2 of you?
That was last year. We still
ignore
do
the screens,
such kind of thing.
the gratitude for the past.
Gratitude is fine, but you also need rebellion. You have to be yourself. I mean, if you have a big heritage, if the legacy is too heavy, then you get paralyzed by legacy. And being grateful doesn't mean that you get paralyzed. So in some way, there's a kind of mix of gratitude and rebellion. And this is what is difficult to find. But we have to express ourselves. I mean, a long time ago, what is now classic has been modern and contemporary. And this is history. So it's a kind of, looking at the past is great. I mean, I'm so much in love with my country. I mean, it's absolutely clear. You don't, not just because of climatic and natural beauty, but also for the built beauty. It's fantastic. You don't make 10 kilometers without looking at something beautiful, especially in certain regions. Spoiled sometimes from recent time. But anyway, it's great. But then you say that all this is beautiful, and then what? I'm myself. You have to express yourself, and it's not arrogance. It's just being yourself. There's no way. We cannot go anywhere except the future, and we have to accept that little challenge. If we have to go somewhere, we have to go in the future. So we have to accept. And the future is not just necessarily the work of the devil. The future is our destination. And so, in some way, we have to accept that challenge. So what is really difficult is to have those 2 dimensions, gratitude, love, and respect for the past, but also rebellion.
Nevertheless, and I know this is a question that's going to irritate you, but when you look around London and see some of the things that have happened to London in the last 30, 40 years, do you have any sympathy with Prince Charles?
I think that if I may expand that question, I'm quite happy to come back to Prince Charles. Renzo said many other things, but in the end, every period if it's any good, is modern in its time. It's contemporary in its time. And that was as true of Renaissance architecture when you look at the background, which is basically medieval. And it's one of the beauties of Renaissance is that dialogue. And I often say, there's most harmony in reality. It is about scale. It is about the hand of the person. It is about rhythm. But it's also about harmony, contrast. It's a contrast between parts. Whether it's St. Paul's, which I often quote because, Ren took 40 years and everybody hated it, and he got so fed up by everybody hating it that he put a fence all the way around it so that he could build it and nobody could see it. And yet, we now say, gosh, that's obviously the architecture, but it isn't. People disliked it then. People have a shock of the new. In a sense, good architecture is likely to be challenging. In one way or the other, or especially if it's good architecture in terms of attempting to do something which may not have been done completely before. So there's always an aim to produce something which expresses the age, and that's the present age. In terms of the Prince Charles question, and in a nutshell, and you know it as well as I, my question is, I would question his taste, but that's another discussion. Actually, I thought the best picture I've seen in years, if I may say it here, was in The Guardian the other day about Buckingham Palace and the Queen Mother in front of that. Where? Oh, Sandringham, sorry, Sandringham. And it was quite interesting about in the sense of being in a sort of little bubble of the past, and that was quite interesting. But in the end,
a little nice corgi basket.
There was a wonderful expression of that time. Yeah. But the point I want to go is that my argument is not about the taste of Prince Charles. My argument is the fact that he won't discuss it. That's my argument. And that famous statement when people tried to arrange, like the RIBA, like the Royal Society, to make a debate between ourselves and Prince Charles, or between myself and Prince Charles, the answer came back from Buckingham Palace and said, the Prince does not debate. That's what I question.
You come from a Republican country, long time since you've had a king. How does the Prince Charles's influence on architecture, does that seem extraordinary to you?
Well, our Prince Charles influenced me?
No,
no, architecture.
You can confess if but the notion that a prince should have...
It's not wrong in making that, in saying that architecture is a difficult job, that's for sure. But the answer, of course, is not to go to the past. The truth is that we have a difficult job to do because architects are like sensors, and we are sensors of a change. We don't change the world, but we witness the change of the world. That's what happened. We didn't change culture. Culture got to change 40 years ago with Centre Pompidou. Somebody got to do that dirty job, and we did. Because, we didn't change, but we actually transformed it. We actually materialized the change. And if you are lucky as an architect and you find yourself in the right place in the right moment, that's what you do. You materialize, you witness the change. That's what happened. And that's the reason why architecture is so difficult and so unpopular sometimes, because it relies on long time. It's not something that suddenly is going to... Architecture is like forests, it's like a river. They live on long time, like cities. It doesn't rely on immediate success. I'm not saying that then you have to do different. I don't believe in avant-garde. I just believe in change. But not change we do. Change that we transform in building, in public building, in things like that. So in some way, you cannot expect to be always understood immediately. Sometimes you have to be patient. The Centre Pompidou in Paris took about 10 or 15 years to be understood and to be accepted, adopted. And Risa, probably for 10 years, we've been hiding our identity with the taxi driver, correct? No,
Literally?
Yes.
Of course I did. I mean, you know, by going by, I'm joking. No, it's not true, but quite. You know, it takes time. It takes time sometimes.
But I don't
So, in some way, I understand why people are nervous. I also understand why Prince Charles is so nervous. But I don't think it's right. I think we have to accept the challenge, and we have to be able. We have to be good. That's the truth.
Have you ever been to Poundbury?
Sorry?
Have you ever
Poundbury
been to
village.
Poundbury, Prince Charles's village?
No.
No.
But I saw pictures. I saw pictures.
So I see.
It's a bit like your tweed jacket. It's
Can I just interrupt one thing? I think it would be a mistake to think that it comes out of your head. It's a continuity. The point I'm making is, in the sense, and I think we're both making it, is that there's a direct link between the Crystal Palace, Brunelleschi's dome, Prouvair's work, Eames's work, painting, sculpture, and so on. These are all linked, and therefore you're not working totally in any way isolation. You're working within a period. You find different ways of working in that period, but you are working in the contemporary period. And I think that has been also since the first caveman left since the first person who built the primitive hut left the cave. That was a challenge. That was the shock of the new. You can imagine when the caveman left that wonderful safe cave, and you could paint on the walls, it didn't leak and so on. And then somebody suddenly said, well, let's move out. It rains, it gets blown over, etc. But you could follow the animals and the women, and it was much more exciting.
Let's talk about cities, because cities are a passion for both of you. Now, Richard, you're famous in London for your noble attempts, partially successful with Tony Blair and Ken Livingstone to change the way that we think of London and to change aspects of it. I mean, has that? Are you pessimistic about what's happening now? First question, and the second question: as you go around the world with an explosion of cities happening everywhere, perhaps especially in China, who do you think's thinking most productively and successfully about what cities should be at the moment around the world?
Starting with the optimistic element.
Two-part question.
Yeah. I think that in the last 20 years, London has changed for the better. If we're talking about it culturally, spatially, as a people's place, in other words, an attempt to make it more humanistic. And I keep on reminding everybody that, when I started in the 1960s, 70s, shall we say, everybody was thinking that we would move to, business, the center of Europe in business terms was Frankfurt. Now, it's difficult to imagine that at the moment. It was actually Frankfurt was where even Lloyd's, which was our first building, were discussing, should we be in Frankfurt, or should we have another headquarters in Frankfurt? Because the whole movement, England and London especially, was closing down around us. Today, with the possible exception of New York, there is no challenge. And that is an amazing quality. Life throbs, especially in London. I have to say it's a bit of a bubble when you go outside, or when you go to the poor areas of London, East End and so on. It's not quite so good by a long way. In fact, it's not so good. But overall, in comparison with other cities, London is fantastic. Whether there are, obviously, the big questions such as climate change is a universal problem, and we're certainly not doing any better than anybody else, and probably China, you could argue, is doing worse than most, not least because of the urbanization of China. Where are there better cities? Well, there are better, yes, there probably are. Germany have done some pretty amazing, Freiburg and so on. There's some pretty interesting things that are going on. Copenhagen, where 1/3 of the people go by bicycle. So there are lessons. No city is perfect, but there are many lessons we can learn, and we try and take it out. And I have worked for many years with many others to sometimes work on those cities, but more often bring it back to where I live, which happens to be London. So there are very clear, and in general, there's a general, I would say, agreement about the steps forward. And I believe, and I think it also could be said as much by the present mayor in London, that cars will be banned from the centre of London within the next 25 years. And when I say, why do you believe it? I say, hasn't anyone noticed that we don't build car parking under office buildings for 40 years and no one ever complains? So we are moving in a direction which I think will improve quality of life. Whether it'll be fast enough to really avoid the crisis that we're of climate change, I don't know. But I'm not pessimistic. I by nature am an optimist.
Same question for you, Renzo. I mean, which cities are impressing, or which countries are impressing you about how they're thinking about cities?
I still believe that London is probably the most civilized city in the world, or one of the most civilized cities in the world, that's for sure. I mean, there's good public transportation. It's one of the few cities where you should not build car parking. I mean, you know, in other cities, they oblige you to make car parking. They ask you to make car parking. In
How
this
many car
town,
parks are there in the Shard? Sorry, can I ask?
in the Shard, we have 42 car parking
42
places,
car
because the
parking.
total movement there is based on public transportation. It's actually sitting on the public transportation hub with 2 underground lines, with 7 train lines, with 20 bus lines. You know, it's kind of, this is one element of it. And the other thing is about the density of cultural institution building. You know, you realize how intense is the cultural life of the city. When I say culture, I don't mean culture with the big C. I'm talking about civic life, about people where people share, where place where people share values, you know. And this is a city where you have all this. And by the way, that's the reason why, as an architect, we are so interested in making public building, place of civic life. By the way, in Italian, città and civiltà are the same word, practically, even the same sound, the city of civilization. I mean, this is the reason why. And so I measure the quality of a city by the intensity of civic life and cultural life. When I say cultural life, I mean also scientific research, I mean all those things, school, hospital, all this that is where people meet and where people share the same value. And in that sense, it's a great city. I love other cities, and I mean, we've been working, I love Berlin, I know New York, and I love New York. I love Italy and many of the cities in Italy, but still this city is one example of a civilized system of staying together.
Now, I want to ask you both about controversies about your recent buildings, because you're still creating controversy with everything you do. So,
So you.
Yeah, but I get to ask the questions here. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about the Shard. So some people love it, some people hate it. He thinks he can get away with it that easily. He's joking. Okay, the Shard.
We'll come back.
Okay, so as I said, some people love it. I'm going to tell you about the people who hate it. You know about that. So there are people who say it's a hideously damaging piece of. It's damaging to the environment. The way it's been built, it's too high. It's out of context for London and the neighbourhood and the skyline. It looks like Orwell's Ministry of the Truth. It's belittling in terms of humans against the buildings. It's a symbol of New Labour hubris. It's a cathedral to a financial system and a financial world that nearly destroyed British society. Are you, A, surprised by these kind of intense reactions? And what's your response to people who make those kind of criticisms?
I said before, I mean, for me, it's architecture takes time, and I understand that all those critics are coming, but I'm not insensitive. I'm actually very careful. By the way, in this country that I said before, is very civilized. We went through a public inquiry for that building, and we discussed, and there was a judge, and we've been talking. And the discussion was even quite irritating. By the way, the only good discussion are irritating, otherwise it doesn't work. So you get to be irritated by critics, otherwise it doesn't work. So we made, and you know, I can say many other things. By example, it's not a bad idea to prove that you can intensify the life in a city like London without adding private transportation, by using just the public transportation. It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea to do something extremely strong on the other side, on the poor side of the river, on the other side, across the river, in a place that needs to balance. And when we did that building, Ken Livingstone, that was then mayor, actually made that point very strongly. He wanted to balance in the city the weight of things happening and bringing something there, because all the context of London Bridge Station has been, for a long time, absolutely impossible. And and the idea to make a vertical city that lives day and night is not a private building. That building, you have public transportation, we have retail, and then we have office, then we have a restaurant, then you have hotel. Yes, then we have 8th floor with rich flat. But by God, those rich flats are for about 30 people out of 10,000. If you make it the count of people living there. So then you have the public terrace there. But this idea of vertical city is part of that. So if you put together all those elements, and you add to this something that is not really completely functional. It's also about going up to breathe fresh air and introducing in London an element that is very light, just by the river, and is a sharp and light, and it goes up, ending nowhere, by the way, because that building doesn't end, and it flirts with the air, and it flirts with the weather, because this city is the most variable weather in the world, everybody knows. And this building, in some way, is a sensitive building. It's flirting with the weather. It's never the same. So, for all those reasons, at the end, I wish people should really accept that those things need some time to be judged. And so, and as I said before, this building, in some way, celebrates the change. It celebrates the change. By example, the idea that we should stop to build outside the skirt, the green belt, and we should accept that we have to build inside the city. Instead of expansion, explosion, we need implosion now. We have to fill the black holes. We have to work on the space that are left. But building intensity of city is a good thing. But growing city is bad, because you create new periphery. So in some way, for all those reasons, this building celebrates the change. So I wish we can wait a bit more, but also new building have a big handicap. They are new. They don't belong yet to the ritual, the daily ritual of a city. And so they have to become part of that. So, okay, I'm accepting that, but I think at the end, this building will be loved by the city.
Who loves it? Who hates it?
Oh. No, I can't believe. I can't believe.
Don't believe
No.
Okay. Bunch of crawlers in the audience here. Okay, so your controversy, Richard, is you wrote 15, 20 years ago about a new type of citadel, which was walled off from the public with security, segregating rich from poor, stripping citizenship of its very meaning. And you know what's going to come next. You then built One Hyde Park, which is for ultra-rich people who quite often, or mostly, don't live there. It's become a sort of tax dodge for super rich people. So that's your controversy. And I know you walked out and tried to avoid it.
Yeah, I knew it was coming.
So what do you say to people who
I don't
say
think I think we have to be ethical. I think we have to be, to do what we can. much more complicated question, if I may ask, and I'll come back to that question, is, what are you doing building airports? And my answer used to be, Nistel. The real problem is not the airport, it's the fact that we haven't got a carbon tax. The real problem with, in other words, you're not going to change it by closing the garage, the cars. You're going to close it by saying you've got to have an alternative of flying, alternative to driving. You're not going to close the luxury housing by saying we won't build for the rich, which is certainly not never thought about building for the rich, because Lloyd's was not exactly poor. So it has little to do with what you can affect. You can talk about it, you can argue that there should be a better distribution of wealth. You can argue very strongly at the moment that there is a whole parts of London which are dark because the buildings are never occupied, not least number 1 Hyde Park, or only a part of it is occupied. But what you can do about it as an architect is little. I can probably do more in the House of Lords or you in the Senate, and saying there has to be rules and regulations which give better equality and better distribution of wealth.
Would you rather be building schools and hospitals?
I love public buildings. We love public buildings. I much prefer. Given a choice, that's never quite the same. I would love to do schools. I'd love to do, I love piazzas. I love the public domain. But I think there's some extremely exciting things which you can do, obviously, with the private domain as well.
But you've only built one school in
not
this
for lack
country.
of trying. It's not for lack of trying. I have to say, we built one which was probably the most successful school in an academy, which has its own questions. We have one school, and we have continuously tried to build other schools, and it goes the same for housing. And though we built a house in the courtyard, which was built in 24 hours, and it cost £60,000, and has high insulation, and so on and so on, it's very difficult to break into the market. On one situation is the political market, which is basically schools, hospitals, and so on. That we are building now a couple of hospitals. Or on the other hand, it's the capitalistic system, which had the house builders in general, with exceptions to everything, are very conservative and have a very definite way of building, and they're not willing to change. So you're battling these things. Actually, it's part of the way that we can push forward by battling those things. Yes, it is a problem. We could be doing more useful work. If that's the question, yes, I think we could.
Okay. We're going to come to the audience in a minute via the Twitter. We're going to have a little round of Twitter questions in a second, but just one last question from me, which is something you said, Renzo, which is, as an architect, you said it takes sort of 50 or 60 years really to learn your craft. So you're both getting better.
Better still in 50 years.
It is the best. Do you feel the best is still to come?
I hope so. I hope so. And no, it's quite true. There's a nice story about Japan. There is a temple called the Temple of Ise. It's somewhere between Tokyo and Osaka. And that temple is rebuilt every 20 years. They make the same. It's a bit mad idea. It's very Japanese. They have 2 sites, and they rebuild the same building every 20 years. And you know why? Because people go there when they are 20 years old, and for those 20 years, they learn how to make the building. And then they stay there. And when they are 40, during that period, they do the building. And finally, when they are 60, they teach other people to make the building. It's a kind of metaphor. But it's true. And the reason why they do this is because they are Japanese. And because in Japan, very simple. You will never do this in our place. But also because in Japan, the idea of legacy and duration is not because you make stone, but because you do the same gesture many, many times. So it's true. There is an age where you have but of course, instead of 20 years, what is true, that architecture you learn for 60 or 70 years. Then you need another 60 or 70 to do the real job, and possibly another 60 to teach other people. So in some ways, a long story. Because it's so complex. And you have so many things coming together. And if you are wrong just in one, you have 50 things you have to do perfectly. Everything you have is like, you know, and even the touch, even the way you do pieces, you draw, but everything must be right. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And then that's the reason why you have to learn so long time.
I'm much more optimistic about youth. I'm not sure age helps. I'm less sure about this. I think, in other words, there's a danger in that concept, because then it always ends up in the old people's hands, and that's very dangerous.
No, but I was, Rich,
Okay,
I was biased.
some quick. So these are Twitter questions. They're from Twitter. That means they're very brief, and I want very brief answers. Okay, because we've got to get onto the audience. So this is from Mark Sullivan. Is glass a realistic building material in 2013?
Yes, I think glass is a fantastic material, but of course...
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is from Lizzie Davis,
sand.
who happens to work for The Guardian, who wants to know what you feel about being plunged into the cut and thrust of messy Italian politics. What do you think about being made a senator just at this particular time in Italian politics?
My God. No, it's okay. If I can add...
You can add one more sentence if you want.
No, I'm very proud. I'm very proud. I'm proud of my country, and I'm proud of that institution.
And she wants to know why you missed the crucial vote this week.
No, it was not crucial, and also my job is for life, and I understood that for life you don't have to do that sort of
Very
thing.
good. Okay, all right.
It's something else.
Which is the project that's most hurt you not getting?
Oof. In the end, I suppose we're lucky if we build about 1 in 20 of what we put down. I don't know which one is the most. We had a wonderful building in the Tokyo Forum. Maybe that's the one. But also some small buildings. Don't know. Too complicated.
Okay. This is from Sanjay. What inspired you to put all the pipe work of the Pompidou Centre on the outside?
I think the curve. I designed the curve. You mean the pipe?
The pipes on the outside.
No,
Why did you
yeah.
put them on the outside, not the inside?
What was my role there?
No.
Why?
Why?
What inspired?
Most people put the pipes on the inside.
Because we are mad, and also...
Yes, that's easy.
Okay, all right. You're getting the hang of this. This is from Dave Hill. Do you like the Boris approach to housing?
He hasn't got one.
And same person, do you secretly wish you'd made the Shard a bit shorter?
No.
Taller.
No.
No, okay. This is a good question for you, I think. This is from someone called Jason Phipps, because I think I know what your answer is, but it's about foregoing concrete, glass, and steel for more traditional materials such as wood or new materials like graphene.
I love to revisit all the material and to reinvent all the material. Of course, today we have a new material, so I like to mix those things. So we have just finished. I know it's become too long, but the new addition to the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth, near Khan building, is made of concrete. But then we use glass and we use a solar cell that is the most modern. I mean, mixing those things together. And we use actually wood. Wood is a fantastic material for construction. Fantastic.
This is from Peter Doyle. What's your oldest man-made possession?
Oldest man-made. I've got some, I suppose, some little pieces of, some Mayan pottery, probably. They're all the things I have possession.
Pen, this is from Simon Kahn. Pencil, pen, cardboard models, or computers? Which do you prefer working with?
Pencil, pen.
Pencil.
Very short answer. Final question for you. This is from Dick Scrim. How tired are you of the joke? When is the scaffolding coming down?
Well,
Or maybe you haven't heard it before.
yeah.
He's not going to answer that one. You
No,
don't have to.
I was just going to say that one of the cards, I don't know if you've been to the exhibition, which I've put there, and I've meant to show Renzo, which people are put on the walls. And one of the cards said, Renzo, when are you going to finish off the shard?
Same question. Right, now I hope we've got some microphones. I don't know if we're going to have the lights up at this point. It might help. And we've got about another 25 minutes. So let's have some really lovely questions, and not too many speeches or statements, but a question. There's a hand up there. You're going to have to do better than this, otherwise I'm going to have to go back on Twitter and ask some more questions. And there's one here. And can we get a mic?
Hi. In a world where a lot of the big commissions are coming from kleptocratic states, what moral responsibilities do you think architects have to pick who their clients are? And I'm not just thinking of obvious cases like Qatar, but also Baku, Astana, places like that.
That's a question about the sort of moral questions for architects. I'm going to try and summarize your question and tell me if I've got it right. It's essentially about the clients you would or wouldn't work for, which could be, are there states that you wouldn't work for, or are there big nasty companies you wouldn't work for? Or individuals?
No, I mean, clients are not divided by rich, poor. They are divided by good and bad clients. And depends a lot from what they do, of course. So it's not because I'm a moralist, but there are things and clients I will never do. That's for sure, absolutely. So, but you don't need to make a big manifesto for that. It happens daily. I mean, in a day-by-day life. And
on what sort of grounds would you reject a client?
Well, war, armament, making that sort of thing. Everything that is against the civic, the civic behavior, and because cultural building and public building are kind of fertilizer of cities. But if you do the wrong thing, then become the opposite. So architecture become a bad service.
Who wouldn't you work for, or don't you work
We have
for?
a constitution which sort of stops or puts certain hints, like, as Renzo says, we don't do military work, for instance. We try, but again, of course, it's very complicated because, so do you do police stations? The answer is yes. Prisons, and you're getting a bit more difficult. So, I mean, it's a fine judgment. And Renzo's point, I think, is a good one, which lies on top of it. And that is, there's both certain places, there are certain nations that I don't wish to work in, and I have tried sometimes, and then decided it's not the place. And there are also certain clients that I don't have any reason to work with. And I think, not so much as an architect, as a citizen, you have a duty to make those decisions.
And do you decide that collectively as a practice?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We talk about it, yes, every Monday morning.
You rightly describe public space and public buildings as a priority, but governments throughout the world no longer regard them as a priority. How can we seduce them?
Probably, sorry, I didn't know.
Right.
Yeah, I think what we're doing here is what's really, we seduce them by keeping on saying, and I'm not sure that I agree. I think in one level, we are seeing much more public space. I mean, if you go to New York, they've certainly cottoned on that you can't have, some of the streets, some of the spaces should be made public. I think London, let's take the South Bank, it's fantastic. This was well, Stuart, it was a no-go area when we were working. You and I were working there some 40 years ago. And now it's the most wonderful place. But that's all about public space and Trafalgar Square. So I think in one sense, I think the message is getting across, like the car. Clearly, one of our complications is that governments, I believe, have limited interest in such things as public space. And that's partly, which is what Renzo and I were talking about as a senator for life, is that the people in government change every 4 years. They never have a chance to learn what the game is, with few exceptions. So it's difficult to develop a philosophy and a theory, but I'm not pessimistic. I think public is getting better.
Do you have thoughts about that one?
I think it's what you
You've
said.
answered
makes
it perfectly. Okay.
Perfect.
There's a question down here, and there's another. I don't know if anybody's up there is begging for a question. If so, raise your hand and shout. Okay, but don't shout just yet because we've got a question down here.
My question is for Renzo Piano. Not only the Centre Pompidou, but also many of your other projects have been for art museums. You mentioned the Kimball, but also Chicago and now Harvard. Could you talk about the special challenge of art museum as client?
Well, we have been lucky in the office. We got a fantastic client, and the challenge is that it's always different. It's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity. Museums are never the same, you know. Cultural buildings are always different because of the city, because of the collection, if they are museum, because of... So it's really always, it's a bit like being Robinson Crusoe, you know, and you go around, and every time is a new adventure. It's not true that it's the same thing. So it's so different. I love art building, I mean museum, but I also love concert hall, but I also love hospital. I also love research center. I love place where people meet. And also I love, I have to say, very much the empty spaces, like Piazza Street. The piazzas are the place where the miracle of urbanity happens. This is where people meet, where difference disappear, where tolerance shows up. And this is the reason why public space or buildings sometimes are not even buildings. They are the space left between buildings, the public space, exactly. So I think cultural buildings are interesting, not because they are cultural, not because they are photogenic, but because they actually help people. You know, let's put it this way. Art and culture, beauty, makes people better people. And the cultural building makes city better place to live. That's what.
Somebody shout a question from up there.
My question is really to do with, I think, sort of, I suppose, the future and sort of young architects, and really what your thoughts are on, I think you mentioned earlier on about the Pompidou Centre when you were deciding when to actually do that competition, but I think for a lot of our young architects and young architects' practices today, there's a lot of issues about actually getting involved in these competitions and obviously pre-qualifying questions and things like that, which stop, you know, sort of the younger architects of today actually getting involved and putting ideas forward, and what your feelings and thoughts are about kind of, you know, the next generation, really.
When I started architecture a long time ago, I used to say that the only way you could start running an office was to wait for the boss to die, which sometimes took a long time. I think competitions have opened it up. I think that a little of the problems with competition, one of the many, is that there's so many, and again, a lot of people, especially developers, use it as a cheap way of finding out different ways of different ideas. They're not properly run and so on, but there's certainly more chance today than there was before. Competitions are, if that's, you know, to finish that, I think in general, they're appallingly run. They could be well run.
Young architects?
Are you a young architect?
Depends what you mean by young.
Exactly,
Younger than us,
exactly,
Renzo.
because, you know,
He looks quite young.
Yes, definitely younger than us.
No, I mean, it's not a joke, it's true. It's what you said. Depends what you call young, you know. When we won that competition, it was just pure luck. Let's be honest, you know, it was pure luck. We were what? We were 33 and 35, 36, 37, something like that. He was the old man. He's still the old man. So we are bad boys. By the way, it's very funny because we found ourselves around this table. He's a lord, I'm a senator. It's really ridiculous.
I'm never going to be a
We
lord.
we have been bad boys the day before yesterday. And today they ask us to be wise people. And, you know, anyway, young architect at that time was 33, 34, 35. Now he's probably 40, 45 because it's a different... I cannot tell you. I just can tell you one thing. I love young architects, and the reason is very simple. By the way, we made in the office a very little foundation where we have students and young architects coming from all around the world for 6 months. We call this bottega. Bottega is an Italian word that makes a lot of sense. It's learning by doing. There's a moment in the age when telling, explaining doesn't help. The only thing that helps is the example. So I like those young people because they have a kind of innocent attitude, and it's very interesting. But I cannot tell you honestly about what are the opportunities today. I don't think the opportunity depends from the country. I mean, this country, I think, because of competition, even in France they do competition. And that even competition, in Italy, they don't do competition. They are frightened by the freedom that is given to architect winning competition. So they don't go through competition. By the way, that's something I can try to do in my new...
I suppose there's somebody else up there who's got a good shouting voice. Shout.
Hi. Do you think the way that procurement is carried out in the public sector is starting to stifle architecture of public buildings?
Did you
Yes.
hear? Yes. Did everybody hear the question? Yes.
How would you go about trying to change that?
It's connected to the previous question, which is you've got to run selection systems properly. And many times, I think, when I've written, certainly, and others have written about processes which have to be more democratic with more people who know what they're talking about, rather than just a bunch of either bureaucrats or purely financiers or whatever it may be. It's like anything else. It's the process which we have to improve on. The idea of public work is fantastic.
We'll move on to the question there.
Do you ever use your public buildings that you've done, say, for example, Kansai or Terminal 5, as a matter of course yourselves? And if you do, how does that make you feel?
Sorry, I didn't...
Yeah,
Well,
like a
it
fly.
was really a question, I think it was aimed at Richard, and it was a specific question
Kansai.
about how do you find it using Terminal 5?
I like it. I mean, airports are fascinating. They're gateways, and they're hubs, and they generate much more than planes. In fact, unfortunately, they generate too much shopping, but that's another... I often think that certainly working on the airports in Britain, what they really want, the clients want it's shopping centers with wings, which has a danger, of course, but potentially they're very exciting, and I enjoy it. I mean, especially if I think of Madrid and so on, it was a tremendous joy working on Madrid. And
You have to do an awful lot of walking in Madrid.
yes, because it's a horizontal airport. And the advantage of Terminal 5, it's a vertical one, so you move better. You're absolutely right.
I was thinking also of Kansai, whether you've used that as whether you visited it after you designed and built it.
Oh, yes, of course. We got an office there. I've been commuting with Japan for a while, for a couple of years, so spending there 1 month and then coming back. I became almost Japanese. The most fantastic memory is the sushi, of course. Well, no, it was good to work with the Japanese. First they try to kill you, and then if you survive, then it's fine. Then it's fantastic. So it was fantastic, and you just you know what happened. You can rely on them if they don't kill you. So it was a great experience. Technically speaking, it was great, and also building a building on the island, man-made island, was something fantastic. Then we got that terrible experience of the famous earthquake, the one that destroyed Kobe. And that day was a terrible day. And somebody called the office in Paris, and they said, the building has been moving that much, undulating. And this is something that you do in Japan, because you make building by knowing that you can have earthquake. So you build with earthquake. So this idea that this gigantic structure that was designed by Peter Rice, by the way. Peter was a fantastic... actually, Peter was not just the engineer. He was inspiring all this idea, organic idea of a shape like this that actually is made in effect to be light and to be flexible. So that day I was very pleased about at least avoiding that tragedy, because then, so it was a great adventure. And we got also 10,000 people at work on that job. And we got no accident, well, it was only small accident. And if you have a job like a 3-year job with 10,000 people and we have nobody getting bad accident, it's very good. And it's also part of that adventure. So I can go on forever, but for me it was a fantastic adventure and a good client, apart from the first 6 months.
I think we've got time for two more questions. So one here. Can we get a microphone there? And one at the front here. But,
do you think that more architects should get involved in politics and be involved in the House of Commons to change people's perception on architecture?
If it's for me, and well, we both can answer, but I mean, clearly, as a let alone an architect, as a citizen, that's our duty is to be involved. We are, I'm always saying, we are politically motivated. We have to be. That's the whole word of citizenship and democracy. Now, whether you have to sit in Parliament, no, you don't have to sit in Parliament, but you do have to realize that you are, a lot of the questions were, how do you make it better? The only way we can make it better is to participate and to try and improve the process. So yes, if there's anything in that exhibition which I put up, it is very much about that there's more to architecture than architecture. It's a much bigger, and it goes for any job, that it's a much bigger thing, and we as citizens have a role to make choices about the society we live in.
Yeah, of course, everybody knows politics comes from polis, and polis is the city. And you have said that before, Richard, but it's absolutely clear that what the elected people in Athens got to say in their speech at the beginning was, I promise you, Athenians, to give you back the city better than you gave to me. That was the promise. That was, what people got to say. I will give you back a better city. Better in Greek, it's not just better. It's kalos kagatzos, that means nicer, more beautiful, and better together. So this idea that, our profession is highly political. It is about politics. It's about politics in that sense. The work, the civilized work of staying together. It's the opposite of the desert. It's the built environment.
I wish we could have lots more questions, but I think this is going to have to be the last one, so it's going to be a good one.
This question is for Richard. I'm afraid it's a rather specific one after these philosophical questions. Walking around the city recently with my friend, we were struck by how very close the Leadenhall building is to the Lloyd's building. I think they work terrifically well together, but could Richard say whether winning that Leadenhall site was by luck, and if another architect had built there, what would you have felt about it?
I mean, a lot of there's a danger in the way that we're answering questions that one ends up by being sounding rather smug. I love being between those two buildings, and it's amazing how different they are. And Lloyd's, basically, which we thought was immensely well industrialized and so on, actually now looks handmade. It's practically crafted, which shows you, points. Renzo makes that we evolve, and today, if you look at Leadenhall, you see whole facades being moved up by crane and so on. So it's very exciting. And I think actually the city, not just those two buildings, but if you stand there, and you've got Foster's buildings, and you've got the wonderful old church on that one corner. This juxtaposition, which creates a fantastic harmony, is dynamic. It's wonderful. And then when you look across London now, and contrary to what I keep on hearing, I think it is much more exciting than it used to be. In fact, my theory is that tall buildings on the whole are probably better than the low buildings because there's much more discussion about them. I mean, it's a nice generalization about it, but there is.
We were told we had to stop at 8. It is 8. Thank you for coming, and please put your hands together for 2 wonderful artists.